Hi, I'm Gail Rubin. Welcome to A Good Goodbye, funeral planning for those who don't plan to die. Hi, I'm Gail Rubin, host and author of A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die. Welcome to today's show, brought to you by the fine folks at French Funerals and Cremations. As the doyen of death, check out the pearls, I'm all about getting the funeral planning conversation started. A doyen is a woman who's considered senior in a group who knows a lot about a particular subject, and that would be me when it comes to the party no one wants to plan a funeral or memorial service. By thinking about what you'd want in your funeral and having that conversation before there's a death or illness in the family, you can reduce stress at a time of grief, you can minimize family conflict, save money, and create a meaningful, memorable good goodbye. And that's what this program is all about. Just as talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead, and your family will benefit from the conversation. So let's get the conversation started. Our guest today is Jeff Harbeson with Funeral Finance LLC. Thanks for coming in, Jeff.
Thank you for having me.
We have an infographic from funeralwise.com that we're going to take a look at to look at costs associated with funerals. And right now, what you see on the screen is the high cost of funerals. Is your family protected? The number that's very low there is back in the 1960s, a funeral was in the range of $700. And in today's dollars, it's shot up to over $10,000. When you scroll down on this infographic, it breaks down into all the different costs and services that a funeral home might provide. But you also have cemetery costs if you're going to be buried. And then it raises these questions about how are you going to pay for all of these funeral and other final expenses. You've got insurance options. There are pre-need funeral insurance through a funeral home. There's life insurance that you can buy on your own. Savings, credit card, a lot of different things to look at. So let's continue to scroll down and see that there are different kinds of funeral insurance, which is great if you are the kind of person who thinks ahead and will buy either a whole life policy, a small policy, such as a final expense insurance policy is certainly an option that can pay for other expenses in addition to the funeral and not tied to a provider. Or you can go down further and look at a whole life policy where that provides more coverage financially for a family as well as paying for the funeral costs, and it's may or may not be tied to a funeral provider. And going down a little further, you can see there are a lot of different details to think about financially when you're talking about paying for a funeral, and how do you choose what's best for your family's needs. So I'd recommend folks visit that funeralwise.com website and take a look at that infographic to really get familiar with all of these different costs. So Jeff, when a family goes in, they are faced with a number of choices, not only financially, but also choices to make that needs to be broken down. And we have a tool that the Federal Trade Commission has mandated, a price list.
Correct.
So talk a little bit about what families face.
Right, when a family, obviously they have grief and they're beginning the grief stages and they've lost their loved one, so they're clouded with emotions. But there's so many decisions that need to be made during this process. And so typically when a family arrives to a funeral home, their first thoughts are of how they're going to create a meaningful service for their loved one. Unfortunately, the next steps are is how are they going to pay for it. The federal government provides a document that's required for funeral home owners to give to families which is the general price list. Inside the general price list is pretty much a menu of goods and services and prices that a funeral home offers. A funeral home cannot charge anything that's not on this price list, and they must charge the prices that are listed.
Yeah.
So therefore, if you're walking to a firm for the first time and you're in this position, at least this is a price guide, and that will be and should be presented to you prior to making any arrangements.
And I'm looking at this, it breaks down all the kinds of caskets, the vaults, you know, if there's cremation, the services of, you know, embalming or shipping. There's a lot of things that are required there. So we see how the costs add up, and on average, you're looking at least $10,000.
Correct.
And how is a family going to pay for that if people haven't planned ahead and gotten that insurance?
Right, that's quite a dilemma, and we're seeing more people in this position now. Just a recent survey by Life Insurance Marketing Association, 40% of our adults in the country have no life insurance whatsoever.
Wow.
So therefore, when a loved one dies with little to no life insurance and limited cash, a cash event anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 is pretty tough. So once a funeral director meets with the family and they've gone through the general price list and they've taken the data and information, then they start to create the services and the goods that the families would like to use. Those quickly add up. However, what families often don't know is that they do have to pay before those services are rendered prior to taking place. And so therefore, they get really limited. They can either write a check, they can pay cash, or they can charge the entire service on their credit card.
Hey, and if you get miles on your credit card,
it's not so bad.
Yeah.
Not so bad. But you know, there's some other issues going on there too that, particularly this is an unexpected event, how many folks out here actually have a credit card that's got a limit that much, and it's not already maxed out?
Yeah.
So there's some issues that came about. That's where our company began to help families, that we can create a convenient, affordable way to help them make funeral payments rather than paying out-of-pocket expenses.
How does that work with the family in the funeral home?
Basically, Funeral Finance provides the funeral home all the information and documents in order to pretty much make an installment loan on their goods and services. Once the arrangements are complete, the funeral home will actually send in an application for credit with us. We give the answer within about 6 seconds of the information coming to us back to the funeral home. Multiple family members can apply. So if there's 2 brothers and a sister and mom had passed, all 3 of them could actually share in making the payments together.
And they can keep on each other to make sure those payments keep getting paid.
That's correct. That's correct.
What do you see happening with younger people also in terms of their finances and thinking about their parents?
Sure. That's a great question. I'm a baby boomer, and our parents and grandparents took care of their funerals, and they saved money, they made pre-need insurance, or basically they had the money to pay for it. Us baby boomers were out here living longer than we thought we would, outrunning our money and spending money on medicine to live longer. And so our children, which are known the millennials, which are 18 to 35 years old, they're a different financial group. In fact, they're at this point financially postured worse than generations we have living right now. So what does that mean? 28% of them actually live at home at this point. So if mom and dad die without life insurance or limited cash, it's going to be strapped for everyone around trying to make payments for their funeral services.
So do we see people spending less than? We have the cremation rate shooting up so much. It's reached 42% on average across the country. A big factor there is the cost.
Sure, that's one of the factors. You know, there's lots involved, but when you consider having a full, complete cremation, similar to a full burial service, and you take out the cemetery cost, you're dropping that immediately about $4,000. So there is some affordability with cremations. However, that doesn't prohibit the family from having memorial services and doing all the things that they need to do to share the life of that loved one.
And obituary costs are amazingly steep. I mean, you can spend thousands of dollars just running the news in the newspaper.
Correct. And most funeral homes now are posting the obituaries on their website, which stay online for quite a while, and it doesn't cost anything. So the obituary newspaper actually is becoming more of a news notice versus a story notice at this point.
And we will talk about that when we come back. We're going to take a short break, and we'll come back to the conversation with Jeff Harbeson about cost management.
How can you eat like that?
Relax, dude. I'm freaking dead. It's one of the perks. I can eat whatever the hell I want.
How do I get in on it?
What, the whole death thing?
Yeah.
First off, I mean, look at what you're eating. No wonder you've lived this long. Feed this to the village cow, all right? Bring him a glass of your finest expired milk. Oh, before you go checking out, do you have a will, any funeral arrangements, plans like that?
Did you?
No, and because of that, now my family's in turmoil. They're fighting, bickering over money. Now they're dead broke. Do some real planning, okay, before you figure out your exit strategy. See? Everybody's doing it.
I can't wait to get started.
I've never seen anybody dying to die like you. Good luck, kid.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Jeff Harbeson of Funeral Finance LLC. Jeff, tell me, how did this company come to be? It's a relatively recent development in the funeral field.
Yes, ma'am. I'm a partner in 2 funeral homes in Virginia, and I had an opportunity to meet with another funeral home owner in New Jersey. Frank Immordino is my partner in Funeral Finance. And during our discussions, we were actually talking about what's going on in our industry with people having the inability to pay, and there was no way for them to make some sort of payment program. Fortunately, Frank's partners in his business have been in the specialty finance business for several years, and so this was born. We figured out a way to help families affordably make payments over time versus that big chunk up front.
And it's not a secured loan. You're not putting your house up for
No,
collateral
ma'am, it's
or
an
anything.
unsecured loan. It's an installment loan. It's much like people who get braces for kids, very similar.
Okay, okay. One of the things that I help tell people about is the final expense insurance. Those are policies that are like $3,000 to $35,000 that are whole life policies that people can get even if they're in advanced age or maybe marginal health conditions. And a lot of people don't even know about that. You know, they know about life insurance as a big chunk of money policy, but there are these smaller policies out there that people can afford too. So I just like people to know about those as well as an option to know about if they're not buying directly from the funeral home. What top tips would you offer for people to become better prepared financially to deal with a funeral, or options that they can consider when they are facing a funeral and haven't prepared ahead of time?
Sure. Well, it doesn't cost anything to plan.
Absolutely.
Right. And so, and as you say, we're going to die at some point. It's an uncomfortable conversation. However, one of the best things to do is just start getting your papers in order. I'm a military veteran, and so a lot of veteran spouses that we've dealt with didn't know that their husband or their spouse was eligible for benefits. Get the DD-214 or any of the type of documents necessary so that you can find them. There's lots of lists, and you're very good at in your book showing how to do those. But the bottom line is to sit down and have a discussion and find out where that intersection is of honoring a life and what you can afford intersects. Because again, it is a shock if you haven't done any research or any homework to find out that pretty much a funeral is going to be about a $10,000 out-of-pocket expense if you don't have life insurance for a burial, and you could be over $4,000 for a cremation.
Well, and when you speak about veterans benefits, that's a wonderful thing for any veteran to know about, because you get a burial plot in a national cemetery or a niche if you're being cremated. For the veteran and the spouse, you can get a military service and also a marker, as all free from the government.
That's correct. And in some some states, they actually have a state-run national cemetery. If it's not one similar to Arlington or some of the others are more familiar. In some states also it's available that they can have an outer burial container for both the spouse, and that's quite a savings as well.
But there are still costs involved, because they're not going to pay for the services of the funeral home and a casket or the cremation or whatever, or the obituary. Those are still costs that the family has to shoulder.
That's correct. And again, when you add those, you're somewhere between $400 and $6,500 just for those services.
And some people want to pay cash, and there is a possibility of saving money in what's called the Totten Trust account, where the money up to $20,000 actually can be saved, but who can save that much money in the bank is the challenge. But then that money could be a transfer on death deed of that account, so that whoever is put in charge of making those funeral arrangements has immediate access to that money.
Correct. And you know, if you really think about it early on, what can we do? For me, and on a personal perspective, it would be, how much do you love the ones you're leaving behind by doing all this and not putting them in that position? Because as we early on stated, that they're under a cloud of missing their family and emotions, and not all best decisions are made during that time.
Yeah. One of the things that I really recommend to be prepared is to fill out those. There are plenty of different planning forms available to get all your information into one place. I even offer one at agoodgoodbye.com to download for free and either type it in or handwrite it, whatever works for you. But it really is important to pull all of those documents together, the bank accounts, the credit cards. There's so many details.
Sure, and it doesn't hurt to shop around either. Visit different funeral homes, see what you're most comfortable with, check their general price list prices and their casket prices, and find out where you're most comfortable to have your loved one honored.
And there is a wide difference between providers in the same market. When I was writing A Good Goodbye, I have a friend, Gary, who just wanted a direct cremation, and we shopped around 3 different places, and there was an $850 difference for basically the same service. So it does pay to shop around.
It does, and that way you can compare apples to apples, especially on cremations. Basic cremations are pretty much the same, and they, again, depending on the market, they can vary to $800 plus, all the way up to thousands of dollars for the exact same service.
So it really pays to shop around.
Absolutely. It's great to compare apples to apples. Each funeral home has a general price list, as we talked about earlier. So I believe that if a death is imminent, or if you're pre-need shopping, visit different places, get a good feel for what the service would look like in that location, their prices, and are you comfortable with the funeral home owner or the directors that you're working with?
That's a very important point, because there are different personalities and different settings, and you need to go there and meet them and find out if you're comfortable with them.
Exactly, and you can also evaluate whether they're listening to you and what your needs are, what type of special personalization, what you would like to do for your funeral, and then cater something around based on your desires.
Well, and you have different scenarios based on who's dying. Is it elderly parents? Is it a tragic young person?
Sure. There's different scenarios, and every funeral's different. It's just like a wedding and a birth. And so for an example of a typical person who is past older, they sometimes, to be more traditional, where they have a visitation or a calling hours, they have a church service and then an interment at a cemetery. That can vary widely if you have a younger person. I've seen where funerals for a younger person tragically could be held at a school or a larger venue. And It really does depend on what the family's looking for, and the cost of those will be based on exactly what comes off the general price list, what they choose to use and to pay for.
But really, it is so important to have some kind of memorialization, some kind of remembrance party. This is a life cycle event.
Sure, it was a life worth living. We share with folks that come to us that they're really not at the funeral home because their loved one died, they're there because they lived. And so we spend time kind of walking through that person's life and how do they want to portray their loved one, how do they want to be remembered and honored.
As we get ready to wrap up here, any other tips you'd like to offer for our viewers to be sure their cost management when it comes to finances for funerals is taken care of?
Sure, look around, find out what services are offered from pre-need all the way down to the financial services of a funeral home, whether they offer some type of payment program. If they do, make sure that there's a truth in lending statement that comes along, and the percentage rates are offered through the state as well.
Okay. Does Medicaid play into this in any way? I know there is the irrevocable trust related to funerals, and we'll be talking about that more in another episode. Does that impact things?
It does a bit because there's this thing called a spin down, and lots of families come in where they have to actually liquidate the assets of the person. And so there is some provisions for that to happen through a funeral home.
But that has to have happened before the person dies.
That's correct.
And so this is something to be prepared for.
That's exactly
sure.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can research quite a bit off the internet, you know, put in zip codes, look where funeral service providers are that offer some type of financing other than just taking cash, check, or credit cards.
So, and Funeral Finance LLC would be one way for people to actually, your website for doing that is?
myfuneralfinance.com. So they can go to myfuneralfinance.com, type in their zip code and see providers near them.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming in and being with us. So appreciate it. Also thankful to the French family of companies for supporting this program. Talking about sex won't make you pregnant and talking about funerals won't make you dead. Start a conversation today.
Proper estate planning enables you to pass your possessions and your assets to the people and organizations that you care about. By planning with a living trust, you could avoid the high cost of probate and minimize taxation. The attorneys at Morris Hall have been helping thousands of clients pass their assets as they intended. To schedule your free consultation, call us at 505-889-0100 or visit us at morristrust.com.
A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die is a light touch on a serious subject. The book has everything you need to know before you go. A Good Goodbye helps you reduce stress and family conflict, save money, and create a meaningful, memorable good goodbye. It's available in paperback and all ebook formats through online retailers and at agoodgoodbye.com. Start a conversation today.
Why are we talking about this at the dinner table? Just put my ashes in a coffee can or something. Please pass the salt, dear.
Can I help you, ma'am?
Yeah. Which can would you recommend putting my mom's ashes in?
I think I heard ashes.
I'm sorry, my mom's cremated remains.
That sounds the same.
Your mom didn't even like coffee. She drank tea.
You can't avoid your funeral. Pre-plan and take the burden off someone else.
Hi, I'm Gail Rubin, host and author of A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die, and creator of The Newly Dead Game. The Newly Dead Game is like the classic TV show The Newlywed Game, but the questions test how well you know someone else's last wishes. It's a fun way to get the funeral planning conversation started. For more information about the Newly Dead Game, visit agoodgoodbye.com.